I met Aria at a small party at a friend's house in early February. I felt like we really clicked from the first time we talked. There weren't many people at the celebration, and the music in the background was calming. It made it easy for us to talk to each other. She smiled and laughed while we talked. But every few minutes, I noticed she was looking out the window at the street. At first, I thought she was just waiting for someone, or that she was uncomfortable being in a room full of strangers. But as time went on, she got more and more nervous. I finally asked her if everything was okay. She took a break before telling me that her next-door neighbor, Asher, had been waiting outside her house almost every day for the past 2 weeks. She said he never came onto her property or talked to her. He just stood there for a long time and watched her house. She said he had called the police once before, but they had told her that they couldn't do anything unless he really broke the law. I remember being sad for her, but I didn't fully understand how bad things were at the time. I told her I would drive her home after the party was over. There weren't many people on the streets, and they were quiet. As soon as we got to her house, I saw a tall, thin man standing on the other side of her fence. He was looking at the house with his hands in his pockets. He turned his head and looked right at Aria when she got out of the car. In a low voice, Aria said, "God, he's back. That's him." I waved at him and asked, "Looking for something, mate?" His face changed right away, and his eyes widened with what looked like anger or hatred. He didn't say anything back to me. Instead, he turned around and walked back to his house. Aria looked scared, and even though I tried to make her feel better, the meeting stayed with me long after I left that night. In the next few weeks, Aria and I started to spend more time together. We went out for coffee, saw movies, and walked around town. But Asher kept coming back in ways that were scary and unexpected. The first time it happened, we were sitting by the window in a cafe, talking quietly while it rained outside. Suddenly, Aria stopped talking to me and became quiet. I looked where she was looking and saw Asher standing perfectly still across the street under a streetlight, looking through the glass at us. He stood there for a while before he left. It didn't leave behind fear, but something worse and heavier. The second time, it was evening, and we were walking through a parking lot at the grocery store. As we got to my car, Aria stopped walking and took my arm. Asher was standing at the other end of the parking lot, next to a row of shopping carts, and watching us again. He didn't have to be there, and he didn't look like he was shopping. He was just watching. 2 days after that, we were sitting on a bench in a small park close to her house. All of a sudden, Aria got tense next to me. Asher was standing on the edge of the trees, partly in the shadows, and watching us again. I knew this wasn't a coincidence at that point. Valentine's Day was coming up, so I wanted to ask Aria to be my girlfriend in a formal way. I told her to come over around 7 for a casual meal at my house. When she didn't show up on time, I tried to call her, but her phone went straight to voicemail. I started to feel weird in my chest, and by 8:30, I knew something was very wrong. I drove to her house. It was odd that her porch light wasn't on. The latch on the front door looked bent and broken when I got there. I walked in slowly and saw that the house was dark and still. I went upstairs and saw Aria lying on her bed with her hands and ankles tied up and duct tape over her mouth. She was crying without making any noise when she saw me. I took the tape off, and she told me that Asher had broken into her house, tied her up, and told her she couldn't leave him. I called 911, and they said the police would be there in about 10 minutes. At that point, I heard someone behind me laugh. Asher was standing in the doorway with a gas can and a lighter when I turned around. He began to spill gas on the walls and floor, while softly saying how much he loved Aria and how no one else could have her. I told him that Aria loved him too and that I would leave if he just stopped. He stopped, then smiled ear to ear, like he finally saw some hope with the girl. He was distracted for a second. I took the lighter from his hand and threw it out the window. It all happened so quickly that Asher could barely get a hang of it. He yelled and tried to hit me, but I tackled him to the ground. We fought until I heard sirens, and a few seconds later, the police came in and held him down. Asher was arrested and charged with stalking, breaking and entering, and attempted arson. Everything felt weird for the next few days. like my mind was still trying to figure out what had really happened. Aria didn't sleep much at all for the first few nights after the event. She jumped at every sound. The sound of a creaking floorboard, a humming refrigerator, or even a truck passing by outside. I stayed with her as much as I could because she needed me, and I didn't think the world was safe yet. One night, while we were alone on my couch, she told me something she had never told me before. She said that Asher didn't start by standing outside her house. He started by following her around, at the bus stop, at the coffee shop she went to after work, at the library where she used to go study. At first she thought it was just a coincidence. Then she remembered that he always waited for her before she got there. She said one afternoon, she purposefully visited this grocery store on the other side of town to test if Asher was really following her. When she got out with her bags, Asher was standing by the asphalt, smiling at her. At that point, she knew he was stalking her. A few days later, the police came back to ask more questions. When they searched Asher's house, they told us they found printed pictures of Aria on the wall. Some of them came through social media. Others were clearly taken from far away without her knowledge. Some of them had notes written on them, times, locations, even what she wore and who she was with. Aria moved out of her house and stayed with a friend in a different part of town within a week. She even changed her social media account so that everything was private or gone. She said it felt like getting rid of herself, but she'd rather be invisible than watched. I still think about what would have happened if I ignored my gut feeling that night when Aria didn't show up. If I hadn't driven to her house or waited an hour longer, things would have ended in a really dark way. Sometimes, I picture myself getting into that room too late. I smell smoke instead of gas. I think of the sound of sirens that never came on time. That's the part that stays with me. Danger doesn't always make a lot of noise. Everyone assumes it comes with threats, yelling, or violence. But Asher taught me that the people who are the quietest are often the most dangerous. They're the ones with a lot of patience, like an eagle navigating for its prey. These are people who build their fantasy slowly, until reality becomes an inconvenience, one they feel entitled to erase. I'm 32 years old, and until last Valentine's Day, I believed that if you stayed in public places, expensive places, or safe places, nothing truly bad could happen to you. My husband, Yusuf, and I chose the retreat because it was marketed as a private romantic escape. It was built around a lake, surrounded by trimmed hedges and soft lantern lighting. Everything smelled like jasmine and warm wood. Staff members whispered when they walked past. Even the water in the pool looked calmer than normal water. It felt like a place where nothing ugly could exist. We checked in mid-afternoon and were led to our room by a smiling concierge. The thick and red hallway carpet muffled the sound of our footsteps. I recall experiencing a strange sense of isolation, as if we had closed off the outside world. That was when we first saw them. They were sitting in the lobby lounge on pale leather chairs, facing the entrance like they were waiting for something. The woman noticed us immediately. She smiled too fast and stood up before we even reached the desk. "Oh, how lovely," she said brightly. "A young couple in Valentine's?" Her voice had the sweetness of someone who had practiced sounding sweet for a very long time. She introduced herself as Hannah. Her husband was Bates. He was thin, with watery eyes and a stooped posture that made his head tilt forward slightly, like he was always peering at the world. They congratulated us on our marriage, even though we had never told them we were married. Hannah laughed when I looked confused and said, "I can always tell." I thought that was strange, but not alarming. At first, they were simply everywhere. At breakfast, they sat 2 tables away. At the pool, they lounged in chairs just close enough to hear us talk. We walked along the lake path. They happened to be walking too, always slightly behind us. Hannah complimented my hair, then my dress, then my voice. She said I reminded her of herself when she was young. I didn't understand why that made my stomach tighten. One afternoon, she asked if she could take our photo. "We collect memories," she said, holding up a small digital camera. "People we meet, moments we love." I laughed awkwardly and said yes, because refusing felt rude. Bates took the photo. He didn't blink when the flash went off. After that, they became bolder. They followed us more closely. Hannah began touching my arm when she spoke. She asked personal questions about where we lived, how long we had been married, and whether we planned to have children. When we went back to our room one evening, they walked with us all the way down the hallway. Hannah looked at her door number and read it aloud. 217, such a lovely number. That night, someone knocked on her door at nearly midnight. Yusuf opened it a crack and found Hannah smiling in the hallway. "I just wanted to say goodnight," she said. Yusuf closed the door without responding. The next morning, Bates asked if he could take another photo because the lighting the previous day had not been true. Yusuf said no, and that was when everything shifted. Hannah's smile collapsed instantly. She stared at him with an expression that felt much too intense for such a small refusal. "You should be nicer," she said quietly. "You married outside your culture, and still you do not learn how to treat people." "I'm treating you fine," he said. "You're crossing boundaries." Something in me snapped. Before I could stop myself, I punched her. It wasn't dramatic. It was fast and ugly, and driven by instinct. My fist hit her nose. There was a dull crack and a soft gasp. Blood appeared immediately. The lobby went silent. Hannah didn't scream. She touched her nose, looked at the blood on her fingers, and then smiled. It was the calmest smile I'd ever seen. She wiped the blood away with a tissue from her purse. Bates calmly raised the camera and took a photo. The flash went off. Neither of them said a word. They turned and walked away. Security came. A medic was called. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely explain what happened. No charges were filed. No arguments followed. Hannah and Bates simply brushed off the event. But that night, they appeared everywhere again. They sat in the lobby. They stood near the pool. They lingered by the restaurant entrance. They never tried to speak to us. They only watched. It felt worse than before. Valentine's dinner was held in the main restaurant. Candles and roses and soft music. I wore a red dress Yusuf bought me. We danced to a romantic number and shared lots of nice moments. We tried to feel normal, but I kept scanning the room. They weren't there. After dinner, we walked through the garden path. The lawn was dimly lit. Red balloons were tied to chairs. The lake shimmered under the moonlight. We sat on a bench and talked about leaving early. All of a sudden, I heard rustling behind the bushes. Yusuf didn't hear it because he was talking to me, but I got a feeling of dread, like something very bad was about to happen. Yusuf saw me feeling nervous, so he asked me what's wrong. I was about to tell him that we should head to our room, when I heard someone whisper, "Do it now." And before I could even react to it, I saw Bates coming out of the darkness holding a giant rock in his hand. He sprinted towards my husband and threw the rock, aiming at his head. Thankfully, Yusuf moved aside trying to dodge it, but the sharp end of the rock hit him on the forehead. It all happened so fast that I didn't know how to react. Yusuf screamed in pain and collapsed on the ground, grabbing his bleeding head. I started screaming for help. That's when Hannah came out from the dark, clapping and laughing like a psycho. She was constantly clapping, like a kid bursting with joy seeing something funny. I still remember her face as she laughed uncontrollably. She was so amused seeing someone bleed that I was questioning her sanity. Bates, on the other hand, stood like a statue, with a blank face. I understood this man does exactly what his wife tells him to, and he too has no conscience or sensitivity. I kept crying and screaming for the securities to come, and they finally arrived. What felt more disturbing was that even when they were carrying my injured husband inside, Hannah and Bates stood there holding their ground, like they had no fear of the consequences of their actions. While leaving, I turned to Hannah one last time, and what she said still rings in my ear at night. She grabbed my hand like she was about to make a speech. Her eyes kept moving left and right weirdly, and then she fixed her gaze on my face. She grinned ear to ear and said I was lucky Bates didn't murder my husband. She also mocked me. saying I'm in no position to complain about them, since I hit her earlier. I finally realized why they were so cool with what they did. The next morning we left the hotel. Yusuf had bandages for a week. Our Valentine's experience was ruined, and we regretted not spending it at our house. It all could have been avoided if we never went to that retreat. My dad's friend is a retired cop, and he had his sources, so I gave him details about Hannah and Bates just for a background check. I had a selfie with them on my phone, luckily, so it helped to track them down. What I got to know shocked me to my core. Hannah and Bates are brother and sisters living at the outskirts in a worn-out property. They don't mix or interact with the neighbors, but one of their oldest neighbors said that the duo is crazy. Their parents died in a weird house accident that no one could explain, and the kids moved foster houses until they reunited after turning 18. I still don't understand. If they were brother and sister, then why the hell did they introduce themselves as a couple? Maybe it's a trap to get close to other couples so they can pull off their freaky shit with them. Whatever their reason might be. I kept checking my windows for a month to make sure the psychos hadn't followed us home. I really hope they get caught some way or the other before they actually end up murdering people. Or maybe they have no one and just haven't found their victim yet. I'm 25 years old, and loneliness has started to feel heavier as Valentine's Day approached. I told myself it was just another day, but everything around me seemed designed to remind me that I was alone. So when I couldn't take it anymore, I opened Tinder again, hoping to find anyone who could help me avoid spending Valentine's Day by myself. I matched with a girl named Gothica. Her profile immediately stood out. She had dark hair, sharp eyeliner, and a calm, unreadable expression in every photo. Her bio was short and vague, mentioning movies, late nights, and deep conversations. There was something about her that felt different, but I couldn't place what it was. When she messaged first, asking if I had Valentine's plans, I answered honestly and said no. She replied almost instantly and suggested we meet. We decided on a movie. When I met her outside the theater, she smiled and said my name in a way that made it sound deliberate, like she was committing it to memory. During the movie, she leaned in close and whispered comments that had nothing to do with the screen. She asked if I liked being alone and whether I ever felt invisible. Sometimes she laughed at scenes that weren't funny, then went silent during moments meant to be emotional. I noticed more than once that she was watching me instead of the movie. I tried to ignore the uneasy feeling in my chest. Dinner afterward felt lighter at first. She joked with the waiter and talked about the film she loved. Then, without warning, she asked about how many girls I had dated before her. I shrugged and answered casually. She followed up immediately by asking how many of them I had slept with. The question caught me off guard, and I laughed awkwardly, trying to brush it off. She tilted her head and smiled. "Men only care about one thing," she said, her tone sharp but controlled. Before I could respond, she laughed and waved it off like a joke, asking what dessert I wanted. The sudden shift in her mood left me confused. I felt like I was talking to two different people sharing the same body. After dinner, I asked if she wanted to come back to my place for a couple of drinks. I expected her to hesitate, but she agreed immediately, almost eagerly. The speed of her answer surprised me, but I told myself I was overthinking it. At my apartment, she looked around slowly, taking everything in. She ran her fingers along the walls and glanced into rooms without asking. At first, she acted normal, making small talk and laughing easily. Then the questions started again. She asked how many girls had been there before, how often I brought dates home. She asked whether I had slept with those girls in the same place. I tried to joke and change the subject, but she did not seem amused. "I don't like men who recycle memories," she said quietly. The tension in the room grew uncomfortable. Then, just as suddenly, her expression softened. She smiled brightly, stepped closer, and acted playful again, as if nothing strange had been said. She took my hand and led me toward the bedroom, laughing lightly as she went. I followed her, ignoring the feeling that something wasn't right, convincing myself that this was just nerves, and the night was finally going the way I had hoped. I knew something was wrong with the way her mood kept changing. but I ignored it again and again because I was desperate for some action. Loneliness is a way of dulling your instincts, and desperation makes red flags look like harmless quirks. When Gothica led me into the bedroom, I followed without protest, even though the uneasy feeling in my stomach had only grown stronger. Inside, she stopped near the bed and turned to face me. "Turn off all the lights," she said. The request felt strange. There was no playfulness in her voice this time, just expectation. I hesitated, joking that it felt like the start of a horror movie, but she didn't laugh. She only repeated herself, slower. Against my better judgment, I reached for the switch and plunged the room into complete darkness. The silence felt thick. I couldn't see her, couldn't even tell where she was standing. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, when suddenly a violent force grabbed my hair. Pain exploded across my scalp as a fist yanked upward, tearing out a clump of my hair from my head. I screamed, instinctively trying to pull away, my heart slamming against my ribs. I fumbled for the light switch and slammed it on. Gothica was sitting upright on the bed, her posture rigid and unnatural. Her eyes were rolled so far back that only the white showed. Her mouth moved rapidly, whispering words I couldn't understand, syllables that sounded wrong. The sound made my skin crawl. It didn't feel like a language. It felt like a ritual. I stumbled backwards and shoved her hard, trying to put distance between us. She fell back onto the mattress, but her hand never loosened. Her fingers were still tangled in my hair, gripping it with terrifying strength. She let out a scream that didn't sound human, her voice cracking and overlapping with itself. "I have you now," she shrieked. "I control you now, for the rest of your life." I panicked. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped my phone as I called 911. I screamed into the receiver, barely able to explain what was happening. The operator tried to calm me, asking for details and telling me help was on the way. Behind me, Gothica rocked back and forth in the bed, still chanting, still smiling through her screams. I watched in horror until I heard sirens. The sound changed everything. Gothica froze mid-chant. Her head snapped toward the window, her expression sharpening with sudden focus. She released my hair and sprang off the bed with unnatural speed. Before I could react, she rushed to the window, threw it open, and without hesitation climbed out. She jumped. I ran to the window just in time to see her hit the grass below with a dull thud. She didn't scream. She stood up, looked straight at me, and smiled. Then she disappeared into the darkness beyond the apartment complex. When the police arrived minutes later, my apartment looked like a crime scene. Hair scattered on the floor. The bed sheets were twisted and stained with sweat and blood. I told them everything. They listened carefully, exchanging looks that made me feel small and foolish. They checked my phone. Her profile was gone. No messages, no photos. It was as if she had never existed. They searched the area outside, but there was no sign of anyone injured, no footprints, and no witnesses. Eventually, they told me it was likely a disturbed individual who fled when she heard the sirens. But even as they spoke, I could feel it. The deep certainty that what had happened was not normal. A week passed. I barely slept. Every sound in my apartment made me flinch. I checked locks repeatedly and avoided mirrors, afraid of what I might see reflected back at me. I kept replaying her words in my head, wondering if she meant them, or if she had simply been trying to scare me. One evening, while walking home from the grocery store, I cut through the small park near my building. The sun was setting, casting long shadows between the trees. I was almost at the exit when I heard someone calling me in a sing-song voice. Tane. My blood ran cold. The voice came from behind a large tree off the path. Slowly, I turned, and Gothica was standing behind that tree. Her grin was wide, stretching unnaturally across her face. Her eyes locked onto mine, sharp and knowing. I blinked hard and rubbed my eyes. When I looked again, there was nothing there. I stood frozen for a long time, listening, waiting for her voice to return. It didn't. But even now, I don't know what scares me more. That I really saw her, or that she found a way to stay inside my head, watching, waiting, controlling me from somewhere I can't see.